3 Phoenix Suns preseason games down and 1 to go. We're starting to know, we're starting to feel what this Suns team will look like here in the 2022-23 season. And on today's episode of Locked On Suns, we'll break down the starters settling in and one big new wrinkle that the Suns have shown through 3 games. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 5 seasons and a writer at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen every single day. We're free and we're available on all platforms. If you're first time joining us today, go ahead, hit subscribe or follow. Make sure we're in your feed every day. If you're finding your way back to the show and for some reason have not yet done the same, what are you waiting for? Hit follow, hit subscribe. We're everywhere. We'll be there for you Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday from here until July. So, hop on board. Let's go. The Suns lost this preseason game to the Denver Nuggets on the road, not televised locally, so I'm sure many of you are coming here to get a sense of what in the world happened. Fortunately, this game was still on League Pass, so a big shout out to all those lovely folks at the NBA for realizing, hey, we got to put this game on locally in Phoenix, even though typically it would have been blacked out. So we'll break it all down, guys. Do not worry whatsoever. First, we want to start with the starters, all right? Because as much as it can feel like we know what's going on there, we know what Torrey Craig looks like. Cam Johnson was injured for this game. When Cam Johnson's in, we know even more of what that looks like. But the bottom line is this team is changing, right? And a big storyline all preseason so far has been how it's going to change. And of course, there's been times, I think, where you've seen the Suns look very much like themselves. You've seen a lot of shots from Chris Paul and Devin Booker. You've seen times where it's pretty different, and you're getting DeAndre Ayton making passes, making shots, catching the ball on the move and in the post, and you're seeing Mikal Bridges drive it to the basket. I think today was a little bit of both. I think today was as close to what the Suns offense will feel like in the regular season as we've seen. It was another game without a ton of Chris Paul shot attempts, which if you remember, even last regular season was pretty common. There would be a lot of games where he would have 12, 14, even 16 assists and just, keep it easy on offense for himself and maybe not even crack 10 shot attempts. Tonight it was only 4. Booker was cold. I mean, he was taking shots but not making a lot of them. That's fine. In terms of the feel, the taking is the more important part, and he was at 17 attempts. Ayton was at 12. Bridges was at 10. They all played about the same amount of minutes. Most of the minutes they played were all together. So it felt like a pretty good temperature check, and it felt like a pretty good version of what we're going to see next week on opening night and all the way through the season. But specifically, Mikal and Ayton, right? These are the guys we've been talking about. I'm just going to hit on both of them. I think from Mikal's standpoint, this entire year, it's going to be about his own commitment and his own confidence. And I think both things were trending in the right direction today. He had 5 3-point attempts in 27 minutes. That's going the right way. I think we think of Mikal as being such a good shooter that we can a lot of the time forget that the volume is not necessarily always that high. He doesn't take a ton of these shots. So to see 5 of them get put up in just 27 minutes, a lot of them contested, a lot of them quick release. He had one where he was falling to the ground. He had one at the top of the key that he had to get off quickly. He had a couple in the right corner, which is his sweet spot, that those were even rushed a little bit. So him just forcing those. It might sound force is like a bad word most of the time. In his case, go for it, dude. We know you can make these shots. We know the defense is not going to block your shot with your high release point. Like, just shoot. And he did that tonight. He had a couple of nice drives as well. Bully ball post up against Ish Smith was nice to see. Just one, recognizing that he had that mismatch. Two, committing to it. Because at first, normally with Mikal, when he gets the ball down there, he's just one turn over his shoulder. He can get a layup up. He can get a hook shot up. And nobody's going to block it, like I just said. But Ish, for whatever reason, it was a little awkward at first. Mikal just dribble, keep, backing Ish down, and then got an easy off-the-glass layup. That's the type of stuff that no one's going to be able to guard him when he's doing that, especially a 5'10 point guard or whatever Ish Smith is. Mikal had a few assists that were good to see, driving kick stuff. That's good. This was just basically how you want him to play. Impressive that his confidence is continuing. The commitment needs to continue to be there, but building blocks going in the right direction. For DeAndre Ayton, this was a perfect example of how he can dominate without too much adjustment from the Suns. I think when teams go small or they defend the pick and roll by dropping their big man into the paint, which Denver did both of those things today, the Suns are going to eat it alive. I mean, their pick and roll game is crafted to punish those types of decisions by teams. And Ayton's athleticism is just too much, whether it's athleticism in terms of finding him in the paint on a mismatch and he's just going to, feast and get easy shots, or it's just getting him lobs on the pick and roll where he's soaring up above the rest of the players on the floor and getting an easy dunk. Still, though, I don't think it was just easy stuff for Ayton. Like, you're still seeing when he catches the ball, he's able to dribble it a couple of times, reorient himself, maybe let a defender fly past him and then get something easier. Those are things he wasn't doing as recently as maybe the beginning of last season. So good progress still. But again, this is what the offense should feel like. This is a little bit more equal, but mostly the same shell, right? So you're not seeing some big adjustment or big change, because that would be dumb, frankly. But you're seeing especially Ayton and Bridges do a little bit more within that structure, within that shell, and it's going to be better when the time comes in the playoffs. Next up, I want to talk about this 3-2 zone. One of the only big wrinkles. I just said not a lot of huge adjustments. I don't know if this qualifies as huge because it's just a small fraction of the time that the Suns are playing defense that they're busting this out, but it is a big change. It's different than what most of the rest of the NBA is doing. It's different than the zone that the Suns ran last year. So I want to talk a little bit about it and why it's working so far. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by Built Bar. If you haven't tried Built Bar Puffs yet, you're depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. Trust me, I'm not just saying that. I love these things. And they have a new flavor, Cookie Dough Chunk Puffs. A light and chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks within, and of course, like every Built Bar, covered in 100% real chocolate. It's all of the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making it. And maybe best of all, the hassle of making it, that's one thing. I cook stuff if I'm really in the mood for it, but cookie dough, unfortunately, even if you're in the mood for it, tends to be a little sugary. Not Built Bars. 160 calories, a whopping 15 grams of protein, and less, what is it? I think it's like 5 grams of sugar per bar. A far cry from some of the other stuff you might have for breakfast or a snack to get you through the day. This is going to be easy, packed with collagen, protein, and light on the bad stuff. Ditch the calories, fat, and sugar, and grab yourself a Built Bar. Go to Built.com, guys. Use the promo code LOCKEDON15 to get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKEDON15 for 15% off at Built.com. Keeping it rolling here, a loss. 107-105. I literally did that on purpose. I'm sorry. Ish-on-ish crime is what I called it. Ish Smith making a shot over Ish Wainwright at the very end of this preseason game. But the result doesn't matter. We talked about the starters, the settling in that it feels like they're doing. Most of those guys were in the positive today. +7 for Mikal Bridges while he was on the floor. The Suns were +4 when Booker was on the floor, +3 when Ayton was on the floor. So good takeaways there. One thing that's different, that does feel a little uncomfortable, a little bit of an adjustment, is this 3-2 zone. It's one of the biggest changes the Suns have made since last season. Look, this is a team that's based on continuity. Their roster looks very similar. I hope by the end of this season, I'm not telling you this zone is the biggest change. But right now, while this Crowder thing is still up in the air and some of the other rotation pieces are still being figured out, changing from one type of defensive structure to another is actually pretty decent. And a team like Denver tonight, especially without Jokic playing, was a perfect team to throw it at. And here's why. In general, zone defenses are supposed to be taking away the paint. You're putting all of your players inside the arc, and I always like to compare it to the toy has the most absurd name. It's those spindly, like plastic bar ball toys. If you're seeing me on YouTube, you know what I'm talking about. The ones that go in and then out, and they were really popular like in the 90s. And you can pull them apart and they're all puffed, and then you can push them in and they're like these plastic rods that are all connected, and then they pull out and they push in. That's how I think of defense. A zone is an even more basic version of that. But this zone in specific tries to take away wing threes, because instead of a 2-3 zone where you only have two guys up front who are trying to cover a lot of ground, and threes are actually one of the things you're giving up in that situation, this is the inverse. So you're able to double team ball handlers on the perimeter more easily. You're also able to defend and contest wing three-pointers more easily because there's two guys, in the Suns' case, that's Booker and Paul, stationed at the wing. So Mikal Bridges can come double there. He's in the middle of this thing. Or those guys can just contest a lot easier because they're literally standing there. And with Denver tonight especially, we know that driving downhill beats all zones. Like somebody who can just isolate, who's maybe quick or overpowering. But the Nuggets don't really have a player like that off their bench, especially with Highland as their main creator now. Really, in their starting lineup tonight, it wasn't much better because, Bones started tonight, but they actually tended to go to this a lot more when it was bench units. Just less talent is probably my guess. I think that might be when we will see it more often. But anytime I think that the Suns are going up against a bench where a Highland type of player is going to be the main creator, he's so thin, he's not somebody who's going to get, drive and ram it down your throat all the way to the basket. He's also not a player where he's not necessarily like a pick and roll player either. And so he's really like a three-point shooter. And in this case too, posting up is also something that's going to beat a 3-2 zone because there's one fewer player down there to double in the post compared to a 2-3 zone, or even compared to just a standard, man-to-man defense where, the strong side corner can come double or things like that. But with Jokic out, the Suns didn't have to worry about that either. So it was sort of a match made in heaven in terms of the Suns really going to the 3-2 zone a lot tonight, and I think a big part of why it worked so well. Again, thinking forward and what tonight sort of showed us, this can be a way to get the ball out of a shot creator's hands in a pick and roll, especially if they aren't super comfortable taking pull-up threes off of screens, because typically when a team runs a high pick and roll against a zone, the defensive team, the one running that zone defensively, they don't even bother bringing a man up to guard the screener, right? When you're guarding something straight up and every defender is guarding an offensive player, the big man comes up to the top of the key, and that can act as a way to get that guy out of the paint, even though, it can sometimes seem counterintuitive to put it that way, because if the guy then rolls right back into the paint, maybe the defender's coming with him. But it's neutralizing that defender. It's requiring that defender to make a decision. And then you're deciding, okay, are we going to need to help that defender, etc. So when that's not happening, there's not as much of an inclination to drive to the basket. It just can disorient. And the best way to beat it One is if you're just amazing. If you're LeBron James, you're not going to be put off by any of this. You're just going to probably get to the basket anyway. But the other way to do it is to take a pull-up three or a pull-up shot of any kind, but a pull-up three especially. So you're not going to play a 3-2 zone against Damian Lillard or Steph Curry, but you might do it against Luka Doncic or John Morant, players who don't have a natural pull-up jumper game. Luka does, but not in this way. Luka has it as more of a step-back thing, or he has the floater, but he doesn't have like a Chris Paul pull-up mid-range jumper or a Damian Lillard pull-up three. So I think it can throw these teams off a little bit. I mean, that's sort of what zone is used for in the league right now. It's just to mix things up. You don't see teams playing zone 80% of the time. The Miami Heat do it a lot. The Raptors have done it a lot. The Cavs last year did a lot to take advantage of having two big men between Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen. It's an easy way to have those guys to take advantage of their size a little bit more and not have them be exposed quite as much. But again, you can't do it all the time because, again, against the best teams, and especially if teams have time to prepare for it, they're going to be ready to take the types of shots that are going to beat this zone. But teams they're not always ready for that, right? They don't always have the personnel. Today, there was a good example where Bones Highland ended up taking a really bad 30-foot jumper just at the end of the clock because the Nuggets just got confused by the 3-2 zone that the Suns put out there. And part of the reason why is they had nobody in the sort of the right corner to the right of Highland. They had DeAndre Jordan in the dunker spot on that side along the baseline, but nobody spacing the floor there. And then they had Highland at the top of the key, somebody in the left corner, and then two guys on each wing. But the 3-2 zone is perfectly set up to defend all those spots on the floor. And then they had DeAndre Jordan there, but in a way, they weren't equipped to go defend that because actually in the way that they had things set up, they didn't map it out well enough ahead of time. So DeAndre Jordan was actually, being guarded, quote unquote. The closest defender to him was Torrey Craig. So if Jordan went up and set a screen for Highland, the Suns are probably going to be totally fine with that because Craig can just take on guarding Highland if he needs to, and they can just sort of turn that into maybe a switch, basically, where now Highland is just running toward Torrey Craig, who's just going to kind of swallow him up, right? So that was a good example to me of the Nuggets just didn't have their you-know-what together to attack this right. And if you add up a couple, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 possessions of that over the course of a game, you can turn the tide of this type of thing, right? It's not going to win you the game, I don't think. It would be kind of crazy to think of it that way, but it's going to make a difference. And if you're trying to win a playoff game or, a big game on the margins, this can be a way to do it. And I think it's going to work. I think the Suns have the personnel to do it, especially with Mikal Bridges being the middle guy there, where he can just cover so much ground. He's such a smart guy where he's going to be able to double or he'll be able to recover. He's going to help the right way. There's a lot of times in a 3-2 zone when the ball is on one side of the floor where the guy's on the backside, meaning Bridges and one of the guards are sort of having to cover a lot of ground and read the passing, read the driving. Bridges is going to be able to do that. So I think it's a good use of personnel. I think it's smart of the Suns to be thinking about different ways to mix things up, especially with their defense, especially without Crowder. So this feels really smart to me. This feels like a good thing, and it's going to be sort of a fun little subplot to watch. It's very geeky, I get that, but Monty's been raving about it, and it really jumped out tonight. Two young guys got some extended run. Josh Okogie making his debut. Duane Washington getting some extended run while Cameron Payne was sitting. We'll talk about both of those players next. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by Prize Picks. I love Prize Picks. It's a great new idea. The basic bottom line is the projections. So, betting on games, right? There's the over or the under on one thing or another. But it's more or less when it comes to Prize Picks, all right? So don't think of it in terms of wins and losses or any of that. It's players. PrizePicks is having you pick one player, and you're going to go more or you're going to go less than a given amount. So, for instance, on any given night during this upcoming NBA season, you could have Luka Doncic to score more than 26.5 points, LeBron James to have more than 7.5 rebounds, you're going to have Chris Paul more than 7.5 assists, and you're going to have Karl Anthony Towns more than 2.5 3-pointers made. All right? So think of it similar to some of the other games you've played, but way more fun, way more creative, and you can get creative. You really can, because you don't even have to fill the lineup the same way that somebody else might. You're not competing against another opponent. You're competing against yourself. You versus the projections, okay? You versus those mores and versus those lesses, all right? So you don't even have to put a whole basketball lineup. It doesn't have to be 5 people. If you like Luka and you like LeBron, more than 26.5 points for Luka, more than 7.5 rebounds for LeBron, you can be done, and you can win money that way. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. They're safe and fast withdrawals, and PrizePicks currently operational in over 30 states and Canada and Arizona. We are one of the 30 PrizePicks states, so download the PrizePicks app now or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, that means PrizePicks is giving you $100. Deposit $50, PrizePicks is giving you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for that instant deposit match up to $100. Today's show, guys, also brought to you by a wonderful new sponsor on the show. If you live in a sunny state like ours, it's pretty dang likely that you've had people wandering up to your door and offering you what they call, quote, free solar. But the truth, many of these companies aren't local. They don't actually know what it takes in Arizona to get solar right, and they're using misleading tactics just to get into your wallet. If you've considered solar, but something just felt a little bit off, My Solar Nerd is here. My Solar Nerd's mission is simple: help you get the best solar to fit your needs. The guys at mysolarnerd.com are local. They live here. They do it here. They get what it takes to get it right here, and they understand the nuances of going solar in Arizona. And they firmly believe that if you live in Arizona, switching to solar should mean saving money. We all know there's not a single cloud in the sky about 200 days a year, so why not get what you need, get what you can possibly, the best that you can possibly get. And My Solar Nerd does that. They put their industry knowledge to work for you by choosing the best equipment, warranties, and BBB accredited installers that are in their network, and they help you figure out all the credits and incentives that you qualify for along the way. Our listeners will get a $50 Amazon gift card when they book a no commitment evaluation. Again, this promotion only for Locked On listeners and only for homeowners. No apartment solar installations. I'm sorry, that is above my pay grade here in my apartment complex and yours as well. Again, that's mysolarnerd.com and select Locked On in the How'd You Hear About Us section when you sign up for that no commitment evaluation today. Make the switch to solar on your terms and start your research process now by visiting mysolarnerd.com today and show us some love, Locked On, by letting them know we sent you. Folks, going solar doesn't need to be complicated. My Solar Nerd makes it easy. Josh Okogie, Duane Washington. We'll get out of here with a couple of observations on these two guys. I think they both have a chance to be in the rotation this year at different times. Do I think they'll both start the season in the rotation? At this point, no. When it comes to Okogie, it was a good first stint. I mean, remember, he's been dealing with a hamstring injury. We didn't even think he would play preseason. So, all in all, I don't think you can be disappointed. I think he didn't look lost, which actually is saying something because, again, they were playing that zone. He's trying to find his role. It felt like he was mostly in the right spots. You know, he was crashing the offensive glass. He was in the dunker spot at times, being used as somewhat of a big man since he's not much of a shooter and the defense isn't going to guard him out there. So I think he looked more comfortable than I was expecting. On the negative, he's still missing some pretty open shots. His 4 turnovers aren't great. That seems really high to me. Having watched the game, it's a little bit shocking to see the box score and it shows 4 turnovers for him. I'll have to, I guess, go back and look at when those happened. That feels a little bizarre. I almost don't want to hold that against him, but I think Okogie, to me, is still somebody I'm intrigued by. I think there's ways you can use him on this team that could work. Monty has talked about playing him and Landry Shamet as the backup backcourt, which is interesting, especially if Shamet can play on Wednesday's fourth preseason game. I would like to see that. I think Okogie can really be a difference maker on perimeter defense, but he has to be able to stay afloat on offense. Otherwise, it's just going to be hard to give him minutes with so many other players on this roster. Duane Washington, it wasn't the first time we saw him. He played last week against the Lakers in the second half after Payne went down. I have to admit, the more that I'm seeing Duane Washington, the more down on him I am. I think there's a reason he's a two-way player and not a roster spot guy. I think there's a reason he went undrafted, and it's defense, okay? He's an incredible shot maker, right? Like, he has an incredibly pure jumper, high-level feel for getting the jumper off. He can get to his step-back three. He knows when to rise up when the defense isn't expecting it, and he can hit shots from all sorts of different angles. Passing-wise, like, he makes the basic reads, right? Like, he can hit the roll man. He can make the skip pass to the corner when the defense rotates to take away the roll man. He can do a simple entry pass. We saw him getting the ball to Jock Landale in the post when there was a mismatch or when Landale had good positioning. All of that stuff should help him keep his turnovers down. Tonight, I think it was 6 assists, only 1 turnover. That's good to see. But it's the defense. We know that it's the defense. We've watched him for 20 minutes each in basically the past 2 games. And multiple times in both of those games, I've seen teammates getting on him for defensive mistakes. I talked about the point switching where he's just bailing on his man and switching over to a different player that is on the offense that he's supposed to be guarding and just pointing at his teammate to go take his man. It's not going to work, and it's definitely not going to keep him on the floor. And it's not just that, it's rotations, it's messing up within the zone that we were talking about. He also gets slammed out of plays by screens a lot, where I don't even think it's necessarily that he's not trying. I don't get the impression watching him defensively that he's giving up. I mean, some of the point switching stuff and some of the rotations, it's like, if you're mentally engaged, that doesn't happen. But I think there's a difference between mental engagement and just like laziness. I don't think he's thinks defense is below him or anything like. There's some young players, especially guys who are really good at scoring, where you see it, right? You see guys who they just don't have interest in playing defense. And that's fine. You can work yourself out of that. But I actually don't think that's what it is with Duane, and I don't think that the reason he's getting slammed out of screens is because he's not putting effort in. I just think whether it's technique, whether it's experience, he's just not able to navigate a lot of this stuff defensively and be in the right spots and make a difference. He's constantly getting behind the play. He feels like he's always out of position, and I'm not the one who's always going to know what the right positioning is, but you can just watch it, and his teammates are pointing to the spot he's supposed to be at. They're talking to him while things are going on. It's not pretty out there right now for him on defense, and even with the stuff he's doing offensively, I think he would have to be an unreal offensive player. We've been talking about Jordan Clarkson being a target in a trade. He would have to get to that point. And right now, he's just not there in order for it to, in order for him to get past Cameron Payne in the rotation, basically. So I can't legitimately say that I think that he's going to play over Payne right now. I can't say that he's going to be in this rotation. And that's a bummer to me because I really thought that there was a chance of that this season. I don't think we're there yet. It's also kind of a bummer that he's not able to be somebody who can go to a G League team. I mean, he's on this 2-way contract, but because of the nature of the Suns not having a G League team, the Suns would have to go find an opposing team's G League squad to go send him to, and then you're worried about, is he getting developed in the right ways? They didn't really do that with Ish Wainwright last year. They just basically used the 2-way slot as a glorified, cheaper roster spot. So I just have a hard time imagining what the pathway is. Unless Washington really just needs some reps in practice and he can get coached up defensively and make strides, on a good team where there's an actual infrastructure and other talent around him. I mean, I'm not closing the door on that, but 40 minutes is a long time to watch a guy, and I did not come away feeling super optimistic that Duane is going to have a big role on this team. That's it for today, guys. Coming back tomorrow with Aaron Edwards. We're bringing his visits earlier in the week this season, so we'll be on Wednesdays with Aaron, so that'll be fun to look forward to. We'll talk about the Q&A that Ayton did with the Arizona Republic, as well as more Suns news. Atlanta Hawks reportedly interested in Jay Crowder, so we'll get to all of that tomorrow. Hit subscribe, hit follow so you don't miss a single show. And in the meantime, go make Locked On NBA and our season preview series on that feed your second listen to get caught up on everything else going on around the league.